Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I'm going to tell my side on the right there to pipe down. Thank you. I know I don't mean to interrupt, but we got to get started. I'm going to start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And just so you're aware, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
I love you, Cody, but I just want to hear you once.
Me too. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And just so you're aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. And colleagues, as you know, this first panel will be audio only. Of course, screenshots or taking phone of your screen is not permitted. And pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, January 31st, 2024, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 8th, 2024, the committee is resuming its consideration of Bill C-355, an act to prohibit the export by air of horses for slaughter and to make related amendments to certain acts. So I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for this first panel. With us as an individual, we have witness number 1, and a reminder to colleagues to reference this witness as number 1 at all times during the proceedings. As an individual, Dr. Judith Sampson-French, practicing veterinarian at Banded Peak Veterinarian Hospital, who's joining us by video conference. Welcome. And from J. Woods Livestock Services, Jennifer Woods, Animal Care and Welfare Specialist, joining us here in the room. Thank you, Ms. Woods, for being here. I'm going to provide up to 5 minutes for opening remarks for each witness, and then we're going to turn it over for questions. So I'd like to start with witness number 1. Over to you, please.
Good morning. I live in Western Canada with my husband and children. We keep horses and cattle on our farm. My children and I have our Métis status recognized by our provincial Métis Nation. I'm here to provide an Indigenous perspective on the meat horse industry in Canada. Regarding remarks made February 13th at the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food hearing, I can see there is a staggering amount of ignorance about Indigenous culture in regard to the care and respect of Indigenous-owned horses. In the past, Indigenous people depended on horses for their survival. We, the Métis, used horses every day for farming, transportation, trap lines, and rode them into battle during the Northwest Rebellion. With colonization, the way that Indigenous people lived changed drastically, but there still remains a tradition, culture, and connection with horses. I'm trying to keep and pass on Métis tradition for my children, including working with horses. Just like most Métis, we're not in a position financially to keep horses only for recreational use. Our farm is not sustainable without the meat horse industry. Raising and owning horses is a lot of hard work and very expensive, but we think it's worth it. Selling draft foals to our exporter allows us to keep and maintain horses for farming, feeding livestock, handling cattle, trapping, training and connecting with Métis and First Nation communities through horse trading and rallies. Other Indigenous producers are involved in chuck wagon racing, rodeo stock contracting, Indian relay, and training and marketing performance horses. And, as I'm sure you know, Indian reserves and Métis settlements were not designated on prime real estate or farmland, but raising horses is a way to utilize this land into something profitable. The Canadian government is ignoring the impact that banning meat horse exports will have on many Métis and First Nation producers. There's been no consultation with Indigenous producers and people on the plan to ban the export of live horses. The Canadian government has a history of stepping on Indigenous farmers, including the Peasant Farm Policy. The Peasant Farm Policy was how the Canadian government restricted First Nation farmer to basic farming tools and practices in order to limit their success so that white settlers would not have to compete with them. And then, as punishment for the Northwest Rebellion, which was started when the Canadian government annexed Métis land, Indigenous producers' markets were restricted by the Canadian government, so that crippled their ability to provide for themselves. Banning the export of meat horses would be extremely effective if the federal government would, again, like to shackle Indigenous farmers. For my family, the ability to have our horses exported has given us a much-needed financial boost to our farming practices, as well as the ability to continue to embrace our Métis tradition and culture. We think it is important that Métis and First Nations producers retain autonomy in their agricultural practices and are able to maintain and cultivate their connection to horses. Our voices are drowned and suppressed by people who do not have any evidence or facts to support their claims.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Ms. Woods for up to 5 minutes, please.
I would first like to thank the committee for allowing me to share my experience on this topic of the export horses to Japan for consumption. I have provided a full list of my equine-focused work in my briefing, but would like to quickly hit on the most relevant ones to this topic. I currently sit on the task force for the sections CR2 and CR3 of the live animal regulations for the International Air Transportation Association. And most notably, I am one of 8 people from around the world who was invited to participate on the working committee charged with updating the World Organization of Animal Health terrestrial chapters for the transport of animals by land, sea, and air. I started working with the Canadian horse processing facilities and airports who export horses in 2005. This work has included facility design, audits, and animal welfare program development. In 2017, I started performing animal welfare audits for the export of horses to Japan, and in 2019, I traveled to Japan to audit the feedlots and processing plants. As I know, this committee is concerned with determining what best upholds Canadian interest and welfare of export horses, I wanted to offer my unique perspective from having audited and made the trip to Japan to audit conditions there, and briefly touch on how the current regulations and high standards allow for the welfare of the animals to be considered and upheld in every step of this carefully coordinated process. These rigorous regulations have resulted in an exceptionally low mortality rate of just 0.011% over the past 11 years. The information I am sharing with you today and what I have shared in my brief is based on science, evidence, and years of research into best practices to ensure proper animal welfare for the export horses from myself and other experts who have similarly dedicated their lives to the safe transport of all animals, including horses. After arriving from the farm, horses are unloaded into crates that exceed the required spacing requirements. These crates allow them to shift, brace, and freely move their heads up and down. They are transported as a group with the same horses that they have lived with for months, if not for their entire lives. And they are not hauled in stalls, which helps them to remain calm on the flight. They do not travel unattended, but with highly trained and capable attendants. As I explained in my briefing, almost all flights were direct to Japan pre-COVID. January just saw the first direct flight since COVID, and the shippers and the airlines are working on fully instating the direct flight soon. The average time horses spend off feed, water, and rest is 22.5 hours from Edmonton and 26.5 hours from Winnipeg, which is under the allowable time. As required by existing law, contingency plans, in collaboration with the CFIA, are in place if the trip exceeds this due to extraordinary circumstances such as extreme weather. Luckily, this is a very rare occurrence. Once arriving in Japan, the conditions of the horses is assessed and they are immediately offloaded onto transfer trailers to be taken to the quarantine facilities, which are all within an hour of the airport. Veterinarians are at the airport for their arrival and the transfer of horses. As previously mentioned, injuries and mortalities of horses on these flights is exceptionally rare. The last horse off the flight is back on feed, water, and rest within 2 hours of landing. There is continuous communication between Japan and the exporters and the shippers throughout the entire process. After 2 weeks of being cared for and monitored by veterinarians in the quarantine facility, they are taken to the feedlots. As an expert that has personally audited these feedlots, I can confidently say they are incredibly well maintained and the horses are very well cared for, reflecting the high regard that Japan holds for horses. These feedlots meet or exceed Canadian standards of care. Additionally, the slaughter plants also pass the audit based on Canadian standards. Members of this committee and other Canadians can be confident in the current strict regulations on the export of horses for consumption. Not only is this a legitimate agricultural business that is in full compliance with strict Canadian regulations and international standards, but it upholds what we know to be true about horse welfare from research and experts dedicated to this subject. I once again want to thank the committee for having me here today, and am pleased to answer any questions or provide more information.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woods. We'll now turn to Ms. Sampson-French for up to 5 minutes, please. Oh, your microphone is just on mute. There you go.
Thank you for having me on the committee. I am a practicing veterinarian of 35 years. I've worked with large and small animals. I have included equine veterinary medicine and surgery for over 12 years in my practice, and I have worked with import and export of animals as well. I have also worked in a horse slaughterhouse, which is I'm one of very few veterinarians in Canada to have done so. I know some about horses, about transport of animals and slaughter. Obviously, animal welfare is a mandate of veterinarians, and it is our mandate to find it unacceptable to abuse animals. That's a no-brainer for us. So to put it clearly, as a veterinarian, it is a given that animals should have a life worth living, not worth avoiding, and a peaceful, painless death. Obviously, standing against either part of this statement makes one a monster, or certainly against our veterinary oath. For this bill, however, 355, we will concentrate only on the second part, the peaceful, painless death. The slaughter in Japan is unknown to us because CFIA has no jurisdiction there. So it's problematic not knowing how, not whether. We're not discussing whether slaughter should happen. The transport issue focuses from feedlot to airport to loading in the belly of an airplane to Japan via one stop or two in Alaska to a quarantine station. Before going into details into the Canadian horse transport by air, the objection is not about slaughter, but getting to slaughter. For best animal welfare, animals should be slaughtered as close as possible to where they are farmed. This issue is not new. Australia is already raising concerns about sending sheep and cattle to slaughter on gigantic freighter ship for a long journey to be slaughtered in Asia and Africa. So the transport is also the issue, not the slaughter, and Australia is trying to phase out the live transport. Similarly, also in the UK Animal Welfare Livestock Export Bill is looking at phasing out also any air transport for slaughter. This is not a slippery slope. Going after the air transport of animals for slaughter is not a slippery slope for agriculture. I know some will raise concern if we ban live export, but what else will the public put pressure on if we ban that? My contention that this is in no way a slippery slope, but the opposite, because a live export has raised big concerns and shed much light to how we treat animals. The message should be clear that the live export to horses should be stopped, and therefore it doesn't tarnish the entire agricultural industry, because right now it is a matter of public concern, and really, why is it not a farmer's concern? So let's jump into transport issue itself. By the way, I have gone to the Calgary airport 3 times. I was alerted that this was happening, and I could not believe it that we didn't send horses straight to Beauvry. I'm from Calgary. Obviously, we didn't send them straight to Beauvry slaughterhouse. I have come to the airport 3 times to watch the loading of horses into crates, and I did 3 times because I thought what I saw the first time was an aberration. I also watched several videos of horses in Japan being unloaded. The staff there is or was clearly untrained. I saw videos of horses being hit in the head while they're still in the crate at unloading with white paddles. They had no escape room, and that's certainly not the way to handle a flight animals. What we're showing the world here is that with the live export of horses is that we do not prioritize animal welfare, quite the opposite to sending them to slaughter. The World Organization for Animal Health, the OIE, mandates specific standards for humane equine transport, which includes segregation of horses, emergency access, and provision of food and water for a journey over 6 hours. Canada is a member of the OIE, but we do not comply with those regulations. It is clear that our existing transport and cruelty laws are not enough to protect horses exported by air for slaughter. In addition, the weak laws are not even enforced if flights will go over time limit and abuse is reported. And in Calgary, if we add up all the time, we're very, very close to 28 hours. And if we have bad weather, that takes it over. So let's dive into the specific welfare issues of the live export. Number one is overcrowding. And overcrowding occurs due to the number of animals in the container. The animal cannot maintain its preferred position or adjust its body position in order to protect itself from injuries or avoid being crushed or trampled. This is a glaring omission of welfare standard in live export because if a horse is fatigued, hurt, or just prefers to lay down, it can't do so. And I've observed that in animals such as ostriches on takeoff and landing. If on takeoff, the horse that's in the back lays down, all the other horses are going to trample. And on landing, if the horse goes on at the front, the other horse will trample it. It's very difficult for a horse to get up if it is overcrowded because it needs forward and backward movement as well as lateral movement.
Miss Sampson,
Number
French,
two.
we're about 30 seconds over time for the 5 minutes. I do want to allow you to have a quick moment to finish, but we are at time. So if you could just wrap up in 30 seconds so we could get to questions. I know people want to dig into.
Oh, okay.
your
Sorry about
expertise.
it because I thought it was 5 to 10 minutes. So mainly also the horses. These are horses kept in feedlot. They are not conditioned nor trained for transport like other horses that are not destined for the live export. So these horses have received minimal human handling, being fattened in feedlots, and they are easily panicked and frightened at unloading with loud clanking noises and humans poking them with flags while they're still in the stock trailers, which I've witnessed. Quick conclusion? No, I've passed it.
Yeah, we're at time. I'm sorry, but I know my honourable colleagues will want to engage and ask, so you'll have the chance to expand on your answers. We are going to get to questions. Mr. Barlow, I believe you're up first for up to 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. My first question would be for witness one. Thank you very much for your testimony. You mentioned about the lack of consultation. Were you consulted about the legislation that is before us today at all?
No. And it's very frustrating. And even more frustrating is MPs saying that they have consulted Indigenous producers when that has not happened. There are protocols and policies surrounding Indigenous consultation, and that process has not been initiated.
Now, you mentioned in your comment about the lack of knowledge of this industry and its impact on First Nations and Métis communities specifically. And I'm just wondering, we had a comment from one of our colleagues that, and I want to quote this, I would object to referring to the Métis tradition and cultures as though somehow this is consistent with Indigenous cultures and traditions. One of the members of this committee had made that comment when we mentioned the impact this would have on First Nations and Métis producers and breeders specifically. Is that what you were talking about the lack of understanding on the impact of you as a producer in the Métis culture?
Yes, the knowledge behind horses and Indigenous culture and tradition, you know, it's hard to compound that into this small time frame, but yeah, it's not under, those statements were very uneducated and yeah, does not represent the Métis culture or tradition.
I know it's probably difficult to maybe narrow it down, but what would be the impact on your livelihood and your business if this legislation were to pass, you know, financially or morally with your family?
Our farm is very multifaceted. We have a lot of things to do to keep it running and keep it together. Raising draft colts is just one piece of our whole farm, and all the pieces work together to make the whole farm. Without all of these pieces working together, our farm isn't sustainable.
Thank you. I know that's not easy to go through that. My next question for Ms. Woods. Thank you very much bringing your expertise here with you today. We've heard a lot of testimony from other groups, but in your estimation, as one of the global experts on this issue, who should we be believing when it comes to animal welfare that is being currently done in Canada with the live horse transport to Japan? It seems like we are not just meeting but exceeding international standards. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I think we should listen to the experts and the people who are there and the government who oversees enforcement and people like myself who work in welfare, and I'm there. I'm right up front. I'm standing there. I'm not from afar. I'm in there with the animals. I've been to Japan. I've been to the feedlots. I have been to the slaughter plants. And if anybody knows anything about Japanese culture, they're very finicky. I mean, even we know that as a country that we export to. The Japanese have very, very high standards there, and I do not have concerns about the care of the animals there at all. So I think we need to look more at the research and at the science and at the facts. I know there's a lot of, it's continually that the animals are cramped, yet nobody has ever given us a square footage. So you're saying they're cramped, but what does cramped even mean? That a regulation is being based, or a bill on the comment being cramped, where our animals actually exceed the required space. The requirements of IATA, the Health of Animals Act Part 12, research done by Dr. Terry Whiting here in Canada, the Code of Practice for Canada, and EC 1/2005 for adult horses. We give them more room, but you also don't want to give them too much room. The last thing you ever want to have your horse do during transport is lie down. No standard says an animal should have the ability to lie down and rest. Horses actually don't want to lie down. That's what we need to be listening to. That's the science.
I'm going to try and, we've had a lot of claims, I guess, from some of the witnesses. I'm going to throw these by you and just give me a quick true or false answer so I can get through these as quickly as I can in my time available. One of the claims is there's clear scientific evidence for a ban on the export of live horses for slaughter. Is that true or false?
False.
There's clear and compelling scientific evidence showing that horses exported from Canada for slaughter overseas experience significant physical and psychological suffering due to the duration and conditions of transport. Is that true or false?
False.
Canada's animal transportation standards are among the worst in the Western world. True or false?
Very false.
Horse transported for slaughter are in conditions far worse than the conditions in other horses, such as those exported for sport or breeding. True or false?
False, and I'm familiar with both.
Now, you mentioned about the comment on cramp, so I appreciate that. In my last 30 seconds, I just wanted to ask a question to Ms. French, Ms. Sampson-French. In a 2021 interview with CTV, you were asked whether or not there's a humane way to transport live horses to Japan by air, and you said absolutely, it can be done. We just choose not to do it with these horses to keep costs down. Why is this bill not focused on the conditions or the regulations around the transport of horses if it can be done safely?
Well, we have been trying to push for regulations that would help the horses. Number one, I agree that horses should not be going down, and that's a default. If the horse is injured, it's going to be a problem on takeoff and landing. Having a partition to wither's height would protect the horses from any injuries. That's how it can be done securely. So when we're promoting, go ahead.
Yeah. So we can do it safely. We just need to change the regulations, not ban it. Thank you.
Okay. If I could just have control of my microphone, that'd be great. If we could go now to Ms. Taylor-Roy, that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. There's clearly a difference of opinion on whether horses are actually, the welfare of horses is actually endangered in the transport, or whether these horses are stressed. We heard the opinions which were put forward as facts, But since there are many different opinions on this, I'm wondering whether perhaps, Dr. Sampson, you can talk a little bit about what effects air transport has on horses when they are shipped in these large containers. I know you weren't finished with your remarks, so perhaps you could finish those and talk a little bit about the welfare of animals, because we're all concerned about animal welfare. We know our farmers are as well. And so I think the experience that you bring as well is valuable, and that, as I said before, there's not one set of facts. There are different opinions on this. Thank you.
Sorry, Miss Sampson-French, you're on mute.
So thank you. And about changing the regulations as opposed to banning it, the problem is we have not been able to have the space to change anything about the regulation beyond a wither's height. And also I've seen at the airport how many horses, when they hold their head in a natural position, are actually touching, or their ears are exceeding the top of the net. My contention, certainly after working with horses, and I've been injured by working with horses for over 12 years, the unloading of horses, when the horses arrive at the Calgary airport, for example, I was flabbergasted to see that the horses did not want to get out of the ramp, obviously from the truck, because they're not been conditioned. They don't know what's happening because they are raised in feedlots. The handlers had to scream and had to use stick poles all along the side of the trailers from both sides to jab them and hurt them to get them going. The sounds are absolutely foreign to these horses. They've never been conditioned to hear any of that. They're in panic mode. You can see the white of their eyes. They're moving forward. They're moving backwards. They're clanking doors to prevent them from getting back into the truck. I'm not sure how we're able to even assure that they are compatible, because the horses are coming unloaded however they are on the ramp one by one, 40 horses or so in a trailer. Once they're put into the containers, then we just go and I just watch them, all the containers. For hours, you hear horses banging and kicking into all the crates in there. So those horses are certainly not at peace. They're certainly not happy to be in there. And if they were compatible while they were in a feedlot under non-stressful condition, under very stressful condition, they don't sound like they are compatible anymore. So that's why I object that animals, these are flight animals. They're not conditioned. They're not trained to be able to handle the stress of travel, which is one of the worst stress in the life of an animal.
Yes, and my daughter's an equestrian, and I'm very familiar with horses. I rode as well, and they are very sensitive. And as well, you point out the center of gravity, how it's higher for these animals. Perhaps you could comment then, how do you reconcile what you have seen and heard with the witness we just heard from, who clearly stated, I think one of the things was that horses that are being transported for show are treated the same as horses that are being transported for slaughter. I know that for a fact to be untrue, so I'm questioning some of the other testimony she gave, and I was wondering if you could comment on that as well.
Well, I've been involved also in that area, and no, the ones transported for shows are actually divided. They have a division, a partition at Withers Height. When the other witness mentions that who should we believe in all this, is that I am the expert and the government are the experts in this. We have made countless requests, FOIP, to get access to all the documents, and they come back incredibly redacted. We're not even able to follow what's happening in there. If the standards are so high, why are we hiding all the information when I'm asking to talk to a vet at CFIA, or when I'm asking to get the information? Why is it so incredibly redacted that I can't even figure out what's happening in there? If the standards are high, show it to us. Don't hide it.
Thank you. And I think there's been comments made that we're not, the regulations are in place where we're in accordance with the regulations. I think that's questionable. But even if that's the case, as you said, we're not compliant with the IOE and other standards. So if that's the case, I feel it's incumbent upon us to actually look after the welfare of these animals. As I know, we don't want the public to look upon farmers and other people as being cruel to animals. So I'm wondering, why do you think it is, if we're a member of the IOE, that we are not in compliance with the regulations there?
Well, I think what has happened, like we're not in compliance with the OIE, and we're not in compliance with even our Health of Animals Act when it comes to animals, and they should not be touching the top of the crates. We were not in compliance with the IAT as well, but now we had to make a Canada exception to shipping our horses in bulk in wood crates, because we're not able to meet any of the regulations with the IATA. So we had to make an exception for Canada, so we're able to ship them by air. That doesn't make sense. But no matter what, the IATA still says, no matter the Canadian exception, is that the horses should be compatible, they should be socialized, they should be able to stand in a natural position without their ears sticking out of the netting. And in all cases, the horses should have enough room to maintain the balance and be able to rise without assistance if they lay down. There's no way they can lay down in there with 2 or 3 horses around them and being uninjured and able to move forward, backward, and lateral movements.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you, Ms. Sampson-French. We'll now turn to Monsieur Parent, s'il vous plaît, pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Perron, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. It's very much appreciated. I'm going to continue with you a bit, Ms. Sampson-French. You have said that people are not following the standards, but previous witnesses like Dr. Ireland at the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, did tell us that the standards are being followed. So now we don't know who to believe. When you say that people are not following the standards, are you referring to the Canadian Animal Transport Standards or something else? Could you provide a bit of a clarity? When we talk about standards and whether or not they're being followed, we are referring to the Health of Animals Act, the standards of the World Organization for Animal Health, and the IATA. In each of those cases, the regulations are not always followed. Certainly, some regulations may be followed here or there, but the full body of regulations from the act of the two organizations are not being followed, so we're below minimum standards. Just to make sure I understand, we are following the CFIA standards, but we're not following the standards for the other sorts of standards. And you think that's what we should do. Even for the CFIA, before every export, inspectors are supposed to check animals for fitness for travel. That is, their health status and the protective measures during transport.
If an animal has a gash between his front and between his leg, I mean, the animals are coming out of that truck in a chute so fast. It happens at night. I mean, if a horse has any injury under the full body carriage, there's no way you can pick that up. So even our own CFIA is not being able to regulate, and their compatibility, we can't assess that at the speed these animals are moving through from the trucks onto the loading ramps into the crates. That happens in seconds.
Bon, merci. Donc, dans le fond, faut...
Thank you. Well, we have to respect veterinarians' work at CFIA, but I understand your point of view, Ms. Sampson-French. What I'm understanding from you, and this is a last quick question, regulatory changes of 2019 are not satisfactory and there has to be a great improvement on transportation conditions, correct? Absolutely, because the changes in 2019 were it was so horrible. The animals were just left. I've seen horses left at the airport at -20 outside for 12 hours and more than 14. Changes were just insufficient, absolutely not sufficient. Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Woods, when you hear people like that who are calling into question these things, as parliamentarians, we are listening to all the witnesses and we have to assess all of the visions. How do you react when you're told that transportation conditions are not good? You're familiar with the field. Do you think that they should be improved further?
I find it very frustrating, such as on the topic of the animals don't have enough room and we don't meet the standards. We actually meet the standards. Nobody has provided any information saying that we don't meet the standards set forth by IATA. I have information saying we do. Japan horses, 3 per crate per IATA standards. They require 1.73 meters squared. We give them 2.12 meters squared. So we exceed IATA, HR, Health of Animals Act, Whiting Research, Codes of Practice. So we do exceed it. I find it very, very frustrating when we keep getting told they don't have room, but nobody has ever told us what room they believe they have, just that they look cramped. They have plenty of headroom. They are in full compliance with headroom. IATA standards, I sit on the CR2 and CR3 committee that writes these standards. They just can't have continual contact with the roof. Horses in stalls, their ears touch the roof of the stalls. So we are in compliance. The information I provide you is based on me actually standing there right at the trailer alongside CFIA. CFIA might not know it, but I actually audit CFIA as part of my audit. I audit to our welfare standards. We see the fitness of the horses. I'm at the feedlot when those horses load out. Those horses live their lives together all the time. They don't suddenly become unfamiliar during the trailer ride. One of the best ways I try to explain this to people, and it's something that I actually document in my audit, is time to load. I time from the minute that gate opens until the minute the gate closes on that crate. So how long does it take to put those 3 horses in that crate? So in Winnipeg, it's 17 seconds. In Calgary, it's about 22 and a half seconds because there's just a little further distance to walk. You cannot cram 3 draft-sized horses into a container that are unfamiliar and don't want to get along in that amount of time.
30 seconds. As a government, or as recommendations, could we envisage further improvements to the transportation regulations to satisfy people who find that the current regulations are insufficient? People who are saying that we are transporting competition horses in better conditions with better accompaniment. Is this something that we could envisage?
There's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement everywhere. My motto for my business is we learn better so we do better.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Parent. Thank you, Ms. Woods. Maintenant, Monsieur McGregor pour 6 minutes.
Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for helping guide this committee through the study of this bill. To witness one, I'd like to start with you and thank you for offering your perspective to this committee. One of our previous witnesses had mentioned that the export of horses, live horses for slaughter, is a relatively new industry in Canada. Can you tell the committee how long your family's been involved in this part of the business?
20 years.
20 years. And how much in that 20 years, like when you divide up the farm income that you have, roughly how much is coming from the horses that are destined for export? Just a percentage, rough ballpark.
Probably 40% as
40%.
a rough guess.
Okay. And given that, I mean, I've been on this committee for 6 years, and in all forms of animal husbandry, there has long been a complaint from producers and from ranchers that, we have seen a whittling away of processing capacity in Canada, and especially for the cattle industry, it's dominated by 2 giant behemoths like JB and Cargill. And a lot of small communities have seen their processing and the economic opportunities from that processing disappear. I'm just wondering, have Indigenous communities, particularly Métis communities, when you look at the fact that the feedlots and the processing is all happening in a foreign jurisdiction, have there ever been conversations in your community about lost economic opportunities here in Canada, about doing processing here? Has that ever been a topic of conversation about promoting economic resilience within Indigenous communities?
I've heard that there has been conversation started in the past, but I'm not sure where they're at now or if they've fizzled out. I think for a lot of Indigenous people, just the day-to-day survival, never mind looking down the road, seems to be what they're most focused on.
Would you look favorably upon a serious government commitment to trying to develop that processing capacity?
Yes, definitely.
You would. Okay, thank you for that. To Ms. Woods, thank you for also for being here. I want to ask just a few questions as a lay person. Generally, what type of aircraft, do you know what type of aircraft is used to transport them? And I fly planes all the time, but is it generally an aircraft where they can lift the tail section and load them in? I'm just curious how it looks.
Well, it depends on which cargo. It's actually in my briefing here, but it depends on what it is. So like a 767 is what Air Canada used, which I know was referenced in the past meeting, that they only haul 18 horses at a time is their maximum, but they only actually haul that many horses because they can only put 6 pallets on those planes. So that's why it's not welfare reasons or anything. If we look at the Boeing 747-800s, they carry 90 horses, 3 pallets, 3 horses, and this is stalled horses also. This is not just our horses. So the 747-400s can carry 28 pallets, which are 84 horses. Boeing 777s can accommodate 81 horses on 27 pallets. So we can have large loads. So it depends on so some of them do have the noses that open and some don't.
And just so on that point, because I've watched aircraft being loaded with cargo a lot as I'm waiting to board. So when you're talking about pallets, like the horses are in crates that's on a pallet, which is moved and then brought up by an elevator and then moved into the space.
Unfortunately, I couldn't bring video, but I have video of all this process. But yes, and that determines the pallet size. So the pallet size for horses in stalls is the same pallet size as the loose hauled horses, but it has to be able to fit on the tug, the mover, the pallet mover. Takes them out to the airport. They go on the lift or the loader that lifts them up, rolls them onto the airplane, and then rolls them down into cargo. But happy to share pictures. And
sure. And those aircraft, they're not designed just specifically for horses. They can take other loads if need to be. Yeah,
they are cargo planes. The horses that are exported to Japan on meat are transported on the exact same type of airplanes that the competition or riding horses are.
So you mentioned on some of the bigger aircraft, you could have in excess potentially of 80 horses, like you said, somewhere in the 90s. Possible some of the bigger models.
Yep.
So on a plane that size carrying that many horses, how many attendants would be required to be on board?
So to be required, the way IATA reads for that is you have to have 1 for a pallet, and then anything over 2 pallets or more is up to the airline and the shippers. But the number of attendants that are on the plane is also dictated by the number of jump seats available. And you also have to make sure there's jump seats available for the pilots to rest. So that gets limited to, some of them only have 4 or 5, some of them can have 11. So it
anywhere
really
from 4
depends.
to 11 attendants.
Not attendants, because other people may have to sit in those seats also that are on the plane. Like if you have any crew that does rest also. Yeah. So it depends on what it is.
And with the way, just a final question, with the way they're loaded, there's generally space for the people who are there for animal welfare to be able to walk to the back of the plane and be in visual contact with the horses at all times during the flight?
You can do individual, yes, you can walk between the pallets up and down. Also, I have footage and pictures of that also.
Okay.
And just as a closing fact, just so people understand, I know that there was the statement they don't do more than 18. The largest shipment to date of competition horses is 89. And coming out of Calgary, I believe the largest one that's come in and out of Spruce Meadow is 67 horses. So we do transport them this way also, in the larger numbers.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Ms. Woods. We'll go to Mr. Steinley now for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank the witnesses for being here. And unlike my Liberal colleague, I believe there's only 1 set of facts. There's not 2 sets of facts. So, Dr. Woods, you've just said that there is constant visual look. You're able to see the horses on the flight. So, in this committee, people have said those horses are unattended when they're going to Japan. Is that categorically false?
Attended. So, yes, that is false. And the attendants are experienced horse people, the same as the ones that are traveling with the other horses.
And when these horses are being loaded, you said visually seen this, and it's not through a video, so you are actually on the ground watching these horses being loaded. And you said 17 seconds in Winnipeg, 22 seconds for 3 in a crate in Calgary.
Yes.
Are these horses, do you see a sign of stress when these horses are being loaded?
Nope. Actually, I may see more signs of stress when they're trying to put the stalled horses in the stalls. Horses are claustrophobic by nature. They don't like to go into small enclosed places. And so when you put them in with their friends in the crates, they actually load quite quickly. And I am happy. I have the video. I am happy to show you the video I have taken right there at the crates of those horses loading and how they load. But that's what our average time to load is.
Thank you very much. I know my Liberal colleague keeps on wanting to interrupt me because she's upset about these actual facts. But can you tell me,
Mr. Steinley, I'm going to stop you there.
Can you tell me for
Mr.
sure?
Mr. Steinley, I'm going to stop you. I've stopped the clock. It's at 3:30. Let me hold on here. There was a bit of back and forth on both sides, so let's make sure we keep it between you and the witness. And I'd ask my colleagues to keep their commentary to themselves or to take it outside. Go ahead, Mr. Steinley.
I don't think we have to go outside. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. But I do want to get this on the record as factual information from someone that's been there and not seen videos, or it's all hearsay. So I want to make sure that we are sure, because one of the witnesses said we aren't meeting the national standards. So I'd like to make sure that you could correct that statement, Dr. Woods.
Yes, we are meeting national standards based on 45 animal welfare audits that incorporate all the regulations internationally and domestically.
So I'd ask you, in your opinion, what does this bill actually, what is it meant to do? Do you believe that this is a slippery slope and we're talking about trying to end animal agriculture?
I do. And I do believe that this is a precedent that is being intended to be set. And one of the big proponents of this bill, and I believe who is responsible for the petition themselves, states on their website that when asked why do they only advocate for horses only, they consider horses pivotal in this movement, but their own words say, if society and our lawmakers can agree that we shouldn't slaughter or eat horses, then logically the next step will be to examine the welfare of all animals for food. And they are asked the question directly related to Bill C-355, if the bill wouldn't have been more effective if the statement by air had not been part of it. Their answer in part reads, it has been our experience that if we ask too much from the government, we risk getting none of it. Small steps are more effective in achieving our goals because there is less of industry convincing our leaders that the steps being taken are too drastic and unfair. They go on to say that when Bill C-355 becomes law, CD, Canadian Horse Defense Coalition, and other like-minded organizations will continue to defend horses from slaughter and their export for the same purposes by any means of transport. So, as the old adage, if they tell you who they are, believe them. But they have directly stated this is to set a precedent.
Thank you very much. Witness one, have you had a conversation with the member that brought this bill forward before today?
I was in a meeting that he did have. I was not invited by him. I was invited by some other members who were meeting with him.
Thank you for being here. I grew up on a farm. I love animals. We treated our animals very well. Could you talk about how your horses are treated? And when I grew up, we'd go out when calving season or foaling season, and we'd be there and make sure everything was okay. Just a little bit about the way you treat your animals when they're being born and raising them, and just kind of they're part of the family.
Right, and I often ask during calving and foaling season, where's my advocacy group? Who's gonna rescue me? Just the loss of sleep and time and injury, and we've spent tens of thousands of dollars on veterinary bills, medicine, equine therapy, chiropractic care, dentistry on our horses, farriers, and of course, I think I said time and sleep as well.
We're at time, unfortunately, Mr. Steinley. Thank you to witness number one. We'll now turn to Mr. Lewis for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, both in person and online. I'd like to direct my questions right now to Dr. Samson French. With 35 years as a vet, you certainly have very strong credentials, and said that you've been to the Calgary Airport, you've witnessed this firsthand, so it's important to have this testimony. I did see you taking a lot of notes as if you were able to respond. In this format, it doesn't have, it's a bit more controlled. So I thought I would give you the chance to address some of the things you've heard as you were taking notes there and respond to them. Sorry, Doctor, you're on mute, so we'd have to start that one again.
I have some grave reservation about how amazing the regulations and the observance of regulations are in these, in the case of these horses. When we're talking, I've been observing several times the loading of the horses, like in the crates. And first, I've seen crates standing at the Calgary airport for hours and hours at -20. I don't know how that fits in our animal welfare. But when they're loaded into the airplane, which I've seen, and it's on the side door, and then in Japan, they've been unloaded from the front. So we have, I don't know, 1, 2 attendants, and yes, it can walk up and down the aisle. What I'm wondering as a veterinarian, which I've accompanied lots of loads of other animals in transport, notably ostriches, which were not easy. All these crates are wrapped in ropes. How could anyone safely access any animals in distress in there? When we're also talking about show horses also transported in there, they're usually procured with food and water, especially at landing or takeoff to distract them so they don't really realize what's going on with the air change and pressure. And they usually have their legs wrapped, which is my main concern with these horses, is that takeoff and landings are trying to keep balance and all trampling on one another. So at the very least, I don't even imagine that horses are not transported without their legs wrapped. And again, if the standards are so high, when I ask questions and I forward the information about all of those, everything is redacted. To measure mortality as our animal welfare basis, it's like, oh, the mortality is really low, is setting the bar extremely low, not accounting for dehydration, exhaustion, injuries. So if we're sending animals and 50% of them are injured, but we say, hey, we have 0% mortality, well, that's setting the bar very low for animal welfare. And those are the reports that we're not getting to us.
I thank you for that. And we've heard it said today that there's no difference between the export of live horses by air for slaughter and then the transportation of horses for sport or competition or recreation or for show. Is there any validity to that? Could it be mistaken that the conditions even remotely close?
Not even remotely close. I mean, those horses from Spruce Meadows are worth a fortune. There's no way they're loading 3 to 4 horses into a crate and say, good luck, we'll see you on landing, and wrapping crates with ropes that no one can get in. So to me, the wrapping with the ropes only allows an attendant to kill a horse in case a horse is trying to kick through a crate at that point. So we're not talking even about the same welfare of shipping horses for show and compared to horses for meat at this point. Absolutely not. And to me, the not feeding, the dehydration is I mean, we know from science, if an animal doesn't get water for 24 hours, we're going to show clinical signs of dehydration. Well, these horses, when we're looking at the loading, and if I look at the loading from the feedlot in Alberta all the way to Japan, we're just on the limit of 28 hours. But are we assuming that these horses all took copious amounts of water and feed the minute before they got loaded? It can be 4 to 6 hours, and some of them prefer not to give them food and water to prevent too much manure and urination happening. So no, we're not talking about the same thing at all.
I thank you for that. I believe that's my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Mr. Parent, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask a question of witness number 1. Thank you, first of all, for being with us. In my first round of questions, I asked a lot about standards. In terms of transportation standards, what do you think would be a good idea to improve? Would it be economically viable to devote more resources to that?
I'm not so involved with the transportation standards. We do transport a lot of horses by trailer, and I mean, if the transport standards are being met and exceeded, I don't see why we need to throw more money at it.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Do you think that this draft legislation could create a precedent? Let's say it's adopted. Would this increase local consumption of horse meat? Would transportation be shifted to a land transportation? Because we're only talking about prohibiting air transportation here.
So the meat market nationally is very small. If horses are unable to be exported by air, you are going to flood the market with meat horses, and there will be no market. Like, that's a concern, is how do we dispose of these horses?
Merci beaucoup. Madame Woods.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woods. When we talk about redacting transportation documents, are you aware of this? Could you tell us something about this? As a parliamentarian, we're all in favor of transparency, so I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, please.
I am not with CFIA and I am not with the government. But I just know that I believe you have to redact people's names and some specific things. It's like a law. It's not because they're trying to hide anything, but it's actually the law that says these are the specifics that have to be redacted, is my understanding.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Do you think that, let's say we pass this bill, do you think that this could lead to the end of consumption of horse meat? Ultimately, you were just talking about a series of steps. Is this what you're referring to? Quickly, because we have little time left.
I believe it will end the consumption of horse meat because around 3 billion people around the world consume horse meat. But they're definitely going to go there next. That is the end goal. That if they can shut this down, they're going after our domestic slaughter also. That's very clear.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Woods. Thank you, Mr. Parent. Mr. McGregor, and then I have one question from where I sit. But go ahead, Mr. McGregor, 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. To witness one, you had mentioned that you've been doing this for approximately 20 years. What was it that your family was doing before, and what were the conditions that sort of made this a possibility, like a business to get into?
Just that we were doing it on a smaller scale, and the price wasn't what it was. So now the price of the meat market has gone up, so we increased our herd numbers.
Okay, thank you. To Dr. Samson French, I've been out on the tarmac before when you've had to exit the terminal to get onto a plane, and suffice it to say, the noise level at an airport is quite high, and we are all very familiar with the decibel amounts when a plane is accelerating down the runway and the sudden shift in position. I'm just wondering, like, in your experience, like, how have horses reacted to such high noise levels? Do you have anything to add to that particular question? And you're still on mute before you start speaking.
They keep muting me. So for me, from just standing to watch the animals that are in the crates, that are taken to the airplane, and then that are loaded in, I mean, even on the tarmac, there's other airplanes departing right beside them while they're sitting on the tarmac, and it's incredibly loud. So when we're talking that, oh, this happens to sport horses, they have been handled. They have been trained. As a veterinarian, when a horse comes to my clinic, the horse needs to be able to load and unload from a trailer. It's not my job to help the client to load his horse. Like, we assume that's all done. These horses are not trained at all to the transport conditions. The noise level for us is incredibly loud, and to me, the only way that I can assess that from a distance with binoculars is actually hearing the horses. Horses that are calm, you shouldn't hear anything in the crates. In this case, you hear kicking nonstop from one crate to the next crate to the next crate, and I feel sorry for the one horse that is sitting in there that's getting the kick as well. So the incredible kicking that goes into crates tell me these horses are not at peace and are not happy being there.
Thank you.
Just quickly, thank you, Mr. McGregor. Ms. Woods, and we potentially might have the embassy from Japan that will come and provide testimony. You may not know this numbers, but you mentioned you were in Japan. There have been suggestions made to say, well, let's process horses here in Canada, and we can still ship meat to Japan. Do you know what the differential is between horse that might be frozen that is ultimately consumed in Japan and those that is slaughtered in Japan, obviously for a fresher product? Like, can you speak to that at all? Do you have any expertise in terms of why they're shipped to Japan in the first place to be processed? Is it just about the freshness of them or the way it's served, or?
Yes, it is the freshness of the meat. The carcasses leave the plant the day of slaughter. They go right out. What we call would be like hot on the hook. So they're warm going out because they're used for sushi is the #1 use of them, and the meat has to be very, very fresh. If you've ever had frozen meat on sushi, you would understand, but that is why they want the meat fresh. The horses also have to live there. So they have to spend, I believe it's 3 months in Japan to be able to go on to be processed. There's a whole set of regulations there of how long they need to be in Japan for that.
Ms. Sampson-French talked about the fact that although the regulations may be the same between meat horses that are going to Japan versus we'll call show horses for spruce meadows and things of that nature, the actual factual conditions in the plane can be vastly different because of their element. Can you explain a little bit? Because as I understand it, because we've heard testimony before this committee, that the regulations are the same, but the conditions of the individuals who may be shipping the horses may be different on the basis of their end outcome. How different is it? Can you explain, just because I want to give you the opportunity. You said you've been on the planes, you've been seen, talked to attendants. Ms. Sampson-French talked about the fact that there's kind of different stationing between the horses. Is there something we could do to be able to move the standards towards better animal health care? Notwithstanding, I understand that we're not talking about million-dollar show horses either.
Well, I believe there's always room for improvement anywhere, but even with stalled horses. The horses that are hauled loose in the crates actually have more room. So, and I have it in my briefing also that shows you the square footage available in a stall is less than the square footage available to these horses. In a stall, yes, they have the partitions, but those cause problems because when a horse goes to brace, a horse has to go out. The stalls restricts the ability to brace. One of the reasons they wear the boots on their feet is because of injuries they can obtain in stalls. And I've referenced actual research based on that in my briefing on those injuries, that horses are more likely to get injured in a stall than they are loose hauled. The standards say to loose haul them. So is there room for improvement? Always. We can always look at it. It's what I dedicate my life to doing that. So.
Thank you. Just lastly, because I don't want to push my time here as the chair, but to witness number one, you mentioned the variety of different elements of how the operation works for raising colts, that it's tied into other elements on the farm. Can you just briefly describe what the other, like if you're raising mares, what they could be used for, or, you know, because I take your point that you're raising the colts for some other reason, and you're shipping them to Japan, but what are those other reasons that are important? Because what I'm hearing from you in your testimony is that if you don't send these colts for the purpose that they're being done now, they may not have a whole lot of useful purpose, but yet they're connected to the other element of your farm.
Yes, so all of our brood mares are also broke to drive. So if a mare comes up open, that brood mare, she gets to go to work in the winter. She hauls bales for cattle, and, you know, helps us train other younger horses. And then after the foals are weaned, we have people who call us and say, do you have these foals available? Yes, come on in, come and look. So we market foals that way as well. So whatever's left over, whatever didn't make the cut, that's what goes to our exporter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. We're going to end our first panel. We'll turn it over to the second, so just don't go far. Meeting suspended for 2 or 3 minutes. Back at it, and thank you for everyone for the quick transition. And I'll welcome you to the second panel. Today we have appearing as an individual, Dr. Jonas Watson, a veterinarian who's joining us by video conference. So great to have you with us. From Overseas Horse Services Limited, we have Kenneth Syrian, Managing Director, I think coming in from Calgary, I heard during the remarks. And from the Canadian Equine Exporters Association here in the room, William Shore and Kevin Wilson, both with the organization. So great to have you here. Thank you for being in person. We're going to turn right over to opening remarks for up to 5 minutes, and then we'll go to questions. So I'm going to start with Dr. Watson, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Good day, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee. I'm here today as a veterinarian, as a horse owner, and as one of the great majority of Canadians who oppose the live horse export industry. Canadian horses shipped for slaughter to Japan are deprived of food for the full duration of their transport, which can last up to 28 hours and sometimes exceeds that. We can presume that the prevalence of prolonged hunger in these animals is high and increases in severity the longer they travel. After only 12 hours of transport without food, horses are at increased risk of developing painful gastroenteric disorders such as stomach ulceration. These horses are also deprived of water for the entire duration of their travel. Physiological biomarkers of dehydration have been detected in horses after as little as 1 hour of water deprivation. Prolonged thirst leads to dehydration, discomfort, and suffering. How does the experience of 28 hours of food and water being withheld feel to a horse? Probably very similar to how you might feel after sitting on an airplane all day with nary a pretzel nor a ginger ale. In 2022, the European Food Safety Authority's panel on animal health and welfare recommended that during transport, horses should be provided with constant access to food and water, or should at least be offered these at regular intervals of no more than 4 hours for a period of 30 minutes. Post-transport colic is a phenomenon that can appear within a few hours following travel. Post-transport colic emergencies require the prompt attention of a veterinarian. If colic develops during overseas transport, there is little to nothing that can be done. We have no way of knowing how many of Canada's exported horses go on to suffer this fate as a consequence of transport, or how and if they are even treated. The respiratory tract is one of the physiological systems most susceptible to infections in horses after long-distance transport. Clinical respiratory disorders such as pleuropneumonia or shipping fever have been detected in horses after journeys as short as 10 hours. A 2016 study published in the Veterinary Journal showed that horses transported by air had a prevalence of shipping fever of 11%. Journey duration was confirmed as a risk factor difficult to control in the face of flight delays and quarantine requirements. One of the most important preventive measures to ensure horse welfare during travel is habituation and self-loading training, which helps minimize transport stress and reduces the incidence of problem behaviors and injuries. This sort of training is undertaken by valuable horses used in sport, such as show jumping and other competitive events. The horses we send to Japan, on the other hand, have not been desensitized to transport of any kind, having spent the entirety of their short lives on a feedlot. But their stress begins even before the animals have left Canadian soil, as evidenced by their experiences disembarking from the trucks. Videos filmed in my hometown of Winnipeg have documented handlers at the airport attempting to unload horses using long sticks to aggressively prod the animals through holes in the trailer walls. This repeated jabbing and poking represents a total disregard for the animal's well-being, and this despite the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's assertion that everything that happens to these horses prior to departure takes place under strict CFAA supervision. CFAA has also been questioned before this committee about the compatibility of horses when housed together in transport. CFAA personnel indicated to you all that determination of compatibility of cohorts is based solely on uniformity in size. That means if 4 same-sized but temperamentally incompatible horses are boxed together for the journey, it's left to them to not fight with, kick, or bite each other. I would note that each of horse temperament, separation from other horses, and regrouping with unfamiliar horses are among the many hazards identified by the EFSA as having negative welfare consequences during transport. Finally, let us not forget where these horses end up. Japan, a country with an abysmal track record when it comes to animal welfare. Some examples of Japan's poor treatment of animals include their ongoing support of commercial whaling, their farming of bears for the illegal gallbladder market, and their annual dolphin hunt, where wild dolphins are either butchered alive for meat or caught and shipped around the world to spend their lives in captivity swimming with tourists. Closer to home, I have far more faith in this country's commitment to animal welfare. I have great respect for Canada's farmers, the essential workers who feed our country and the world. But the live horse export industry does not feed Canadians. It caters to a foreign market of super elites whose gustatory special needs have been prioritized over the health, safety, and well-being of Canada's horses. The oath I took as a veterinarian requires me to promote animal welfare and prevent animal suffering. The live horse export industry is cruel to animals and inconsistent with the values held by most Canadians. As such, I support Bill C-355, and I hope you all will listen to your constituents and ensure its passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. We'll now turn to Mr. Sarian. I hope I'm saying that right. Sarian, over to you.
Yes, you are saying that correctly. Dear Chair and committee members of the Standing Committee of Agriculture and Agri-Food, my name is Kenneth Sarian, and I'm the Managing Director of Overseas Horse Services Limited. Overseas Horse Services is a transportation company that organizes the flights for sports and companion horses in Canada. We've been flying horses from all over the world, to and from Canada, since 2008. Our company arranges everything to facilitate the import and export of these horses, from quarantine, stabling, blood testing, health papers, and general logistics. The sports, racing, dressage, and show jumping, and companion horses, and the business surrounding that, which is horse sales, ground and air transportation, generates an estimated about $150 million Canadian dollars a year in Canada. The majority is generated by these major competitions such as Spruce Meadows, Thunderbird Show Park, Royal Winter Fair, Wesley Clover Park, Major League Show Jumping, and Woodbine Racetrack, all of which are highly dependent on the ability to import and export horses by air. Currently, around 1,000 horses are being exported from and imported into Canada by air every year, and many are shipped to attend these competitions. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of this committee and share mine and my colleagues' opinion concerning Bill C-355, as this bill can have serious consequences for the air transportation of sports horses and companion horses. Please note that there is a significant difference in handling sport and companion horses and horses for slaughter and fattening. All horses we transport have been trained to be handled and are halter broke. They are used to regularly being transported by road or air. As a result, we can load these horses on a safe manner in divided standing stalls on the plane, where a maximum of 3 horses are loaded per stall in their own segregated compartment. Yeah? Horses for slaughter, on the other hand, are not used to regular handling or lack of basic behavior training, and therefore require a different loading protocol. Yeah? Here are some of my comments regarding the bill itself. Yeah? So first of all, I have a comment about the declaration that is proposed. Yeah? Pilots or CBSA have no expertise in horse behavior. They don't know if an animal is in distress or not. They would not recognize the difference between a companion sports horse or a horse for slaughter or fattening. Therefore, relying on them to make decisions regarding the welfare of horses during transportation could be impractical and potentially risky. Prior to every export, we already submit an export declaration via the Canadian Export Reporting System, which is called CERS, which is part of CBSA and Statistics Canada. So we're already doing these export declarations, and we already provide all the information to CBSA and to Statistics Canada. As per my above comments, I'm concerned regarding the implementation of this process, especially as cargo planes have very irregular and often changing operating hours. Then the second point that I'd like to talk about is detention. So the bill asks that the Chief of Customs at every airport must detain a horse until they have a copy of the declaration. Again, I'm concerned about this implementation. How and where will these horses be detained at airports, as most airports lack the proper facilities to detain horses? In Calgary, we have a specialized animal facility that has the potential to detain 12 horses at a time. Toronto Pearson Airport only has the potential to detain 3 horses, but other airports that regularly handle horses for export, such as Vancouver Airport, Montreal Airport, Ottawa Airport, Hamilton Airport, etc., don't have these facilities. You cannot detain a horse without having proper holding facilities, as it jeopardizes the health of the horse greatly and would also be considered inhumane and also unsafe for staff. Additionally, because the horses are under quarantine status, you cannot bring them back to their point of origin in Canada. There is a lot of steps involved in the transporting of the horses by air from Canada. And for example, quarantine protocols, testing, health papers, trucking. So detaining the horses could have grave consequences for the movement itself and the CFIA staff that are supervising this movement. And then the last thing that I'd like to talk about is the false or misleading information part of the bill. I'm really uncertain how this can be enforced and evaluated. The transportation companies and airlines wholly depend on the information provided by the client, the horse owner, regarding the purpose of the export. Additionally, how do we know where the horse eventually ends up overseas? There is no traceability in Canada or in the EU. Or everywhere in the world. There is no traceability. These are some of my concerns that we're having reading this bill, and it's my opinion that the implementation of this bill will greatly hinder the process of exporting horses from Canada for show and companion purposes. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk in front of all this about this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn it right over to the Canadian Equine Exporters Association. Over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, for the invitation to speak today to this committee. I am here today on behalf of the Canadian Equine Exporters Association. First and foremost, we want to bring to your attention that our industry believes that we have not had enough meaningful consultations with all industry stakeholders, including exporters, producers, multiple First Nations communities, and the airline pilots on this bill prior to it being introduced into Parliament. While some members of this committee did agree to take meetings with us, 45 minutes is not near enough to gain the true insight to the economic impact on this bill that will have on Canadian farm families, nor to understand the immense implications to animal welfare that this bill will create. Proof of this is in the complete and utter misconception that these horses are only 18 months of age when they are exported. We have no idea where the government heard this. However, it is not accurate at all. Export contracts state today horses must be between the ages of 24 to 36 months prior to arriving in Japan. Removal of the revenue of these specific, purpose-bred draft horses will be detrimental to the Canadian economy and to these families. And Mr. Chair, This will cause a huge animal welfare issue to the nearly 13,000 purpose-bred draft horses that are involved in this market. What are these breeders supposed to do with these mares, stallions, and foals that they have invested in to feed their families? Nowhere in this bill have we seen any talk of compensation towards these farmers. What are they going to do with these mares and stallions? As of last week, domestic slaughter buyers have been made offers to our customers that do not represent more than 8% of the current fair market value of these foals that we bring to our customers. And no one at this committee wants to talk about the colts that are produced as a result of pregnant mares' urine production in Western Canada. For those who do not know, PMU industry is a source of pharmaceutical ingredients that are highly sought after in today's modern medicine. My next point, Mr. Chair, is the well-funded animal activist campaign that has sought a few celebrity endorsements to promote their cause to the public based on falsehoods and inaccurate depictions of the facts. This agenda pulls at the heartstrings of many Canadians. However, they do not represent the actual facts. For example, it has been told in Parliament that the United States has banned this practice. That is 100% false. Today, export charts to Japan from the USA can still be issued by the USDA. This is not an animal transportation issue. This is an animal end-use issue. And we have heard from independent professionals like the CFIA and Jennifer Woods, an animal welfare expert who has witnessed this firsthand right before we are loading these animals, while we are loading these animals on the farm. They have witnessed this, and they have both come back to the same conclusions, that we are exceeding the current standards set out in the Health of Animals Act and the Health of Animals regulations. These are the facts, Mr. Chair, and facts don't care about your feelings. Has anyone in this committee taken the time to visit the manufacturer of these boxes that we load these animals into? Has anybody at this committee taken the time to witness where, in live action, these horses being loaded onto the airplanes? Because all we keep hearing about is the cramped conditions that exist. However, the facts from CFIA and animal welfare experts and industry professionals all agree 100% this is not the case. So why are we still hearing this point? Again and again. Is it because the people of this committee have chosen to turn a blind eye to the science and the evidence and believe a celebrity endorsement campaign? Their ultimate goal is to stop animal agriculture altogether. If you don't believe me, listen to this quote from the Canadian Horse Defence Coalition, one of the major stakeholders in this debate and central player in the petitions and emails that we are hearing so much about. On their website, under the frequently asked questions section, they state, if society and our lawmakers can agree that we shouldn't export, slaughter, and eat horses, then logically the next step will be to examine the welfare of all animals used for food. End quote. So there you have it, Mr. Chair. Make no mistake, this is the tip of the iceberg. Animal agriculture is the Titanic, and if this legislation passes, we all know what the result will be. If we want to talk about public policy and public signatures and public outcry, before this committee is a letter signed by over 20 internationally recognized Canadian farm organizations, Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and the Canadian Meat Council, just to name a few. These farm organizations represent almost 200,000 farm businesses and farm families who oppose this bill. Letting an animal's end use and allowing extreme animal activism to dictate agricultural policy in this country is a mistake. We as Canadians and as industry ask the government to follow the science and facts presented by the animal welfare experts and CFIA who have audited this process firsthand. We can discuss and debate opinions, but we cannot dispute the facts. Thank you for your time. My colleague and I, Mr. Shore, will welcome any questions the committee has for us.
We're going to get to that right now, Mr. Wilson. We'll turn it over to my Conservative bench here, Mr. Barlow, for up to 6 minutes. The way we'll do it, colleagues, we are going to try to do 2 full panels, even if it just puts us slightly beyond. I might have to limit time in the second, but I'll do my best. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses who are with me here today. And Mr. Wilson, you were pretty clear that you weren't consulted, and I found it interesting that one of the main issues that we brought up was from First Nations and Métis communities also were not consulted at all. And we had a Métis witness here today, and none of them asked her any questions. So what did you feel was the level of consultation before this bill was tabled in the House of Commons, before it came to this committee? Was there any consultation before this was tabled, and what has been the consultation afterwards?
From our experience, it has been that from the get-go, the set out of this bill, the opposition never addressed the Indigenous component because they didn't believe that it existed. We represent many exporters at this table, Bill and I, and we deal with Mohawk, Ojibwe, and the Métis Nation of Alberta. So prior to this coming to the Parliament, I don't think they realized what they were doing because they claimed that it was a small business that only 4 people were involved in.
Have you been consulted in the meantime or before by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada?
We organized, yes we did, one Zoom meeting that lasted 45 minutes, and prior to the conclusion of that meeting, many members of AAFC logged off the Zoom call. I extended an invite to come to our facility in Eastern Canada and witness how these horses are raised, how they are transported from the breeders to the feedlots and so on from here to the airports. They did accept my invitation. However, when it come time to schedule it, everybody's schedules conflicted on their end. We offered them footage of these horses in flight, to which they responded that they were not able to look at it. So where we went on that, we left that meeting very disheartened. We did not feel that they understood the whole scope of our industry. And like I said in our opening statement, 45 minutes is not enough to talk about the impact the veterinarians, the feed companies, the transportation companies, the staff that work at these facilities. Thank you for your question.
So if I'm getting you, no one from Agriculture Canada, Agri-Food Canada has taken you up on the invitation to participate in a flight, come and watch the loading and unloading. That has never happened?
No, it has not.
So I'm assuming we heard some testimony prior to this in the previous hour that there's, this cloak of secrecy over what goes on and redacting all of this information. It sounds to me like your association is quite open and transparent, inviting those important officials who should have a working knowledge of how this works. You've been open to it, allowing them to see firsthand what's going on. They just haven't taken you up on that invitation. Is that fair?
We have offered to take them to the breeders of these horses out in Western Canada to visit the pastures where these foals are grown and raised on the mares. We have offered to take them to the airplane and watch them load these horses. We have offered them to take them to multiple feedlots where these horses are raised, and the answer was always, we'll get back to you. We will get back to you.
To Mr. Sarin, thank you very much. I would like to ask you a similar question. What was the level of consultation for your organization from the government prior to this bill being tabled in the House?
There was none.
So the Animal Transportation Associations here has mentioned in their submission that, and I just want to quote this really quickly, logistically, Bill C-3355 will pose significant challenges for equine transporters and airlines operating in Canada. The requirement stipulating that every horse departing Canada via air transportation must be verified to not be intended for meat processing before export is unprecedented and introduces complexities not seen in other countries. This requirement imposes an additional burden on equine transporters and airlines, necessitating thorough verification processes to ensuring compliance. Now, as an operator whose business is focused on this transportation, not only here but internationally, would you agree with this statement? And would you like, maybe expand on the impact that this will have on the transportation industry, CBSA, for example, and airline pilots?
Yes, I agree with this statement. In my personal opinion and my colleagues, I think giving the declaration into the hands of CBSA or airline pilots, as I stated, is wrong. The only person or the only government agency that should be looking at this and making these decisions is the CFIA. They're the only ones that are responsible for this in their mandate and also have the experience to check the animal welfare and the fitness of these horses being flown. So that's in our opinion. Pilots, their job is to fly the plane, honestly. And CBSA, they're customs officers, so they don't really act and don't have the experience to make decisions concerning animal welfare or if these horses are going for slaughter or if they're sport horses, companion horses, or if they're unfit to travel. So, yeah, that's in my opinion.
Yes, to have that $250,000 fine on pilots, I would think would be quite onerous for pilots to be willing to take on that responsibility.
That's correct. Yes.
Lastly, I've got 30 seconds or 20 seconds or so. One of the experts, allegedly said that one of the welfare issues is for horses don't have the ability to lie down and rest during transportation. In your experience, is that something that horses are wanting to do during transportation? Is lie down? What is your opinion on that?
No, we do not want the horses to go lie down, because if that's happening, then the horse is in distress. And we always want the horse to be standing up in their stall, to make sure that 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 we can properly feed them, that we can water them. But if, in our opinion, if they go down for the second time, then we have a conversation with the pilots, the airline operations center, and then we have to make an emergency landing in order to safely offload the horse and to make sure that there is no indication of distress or So we do not want to have the horses to lie down.
Thank you, Mr. Sarian. Very clear. Go ahead, Mr. Carr, 6 minutes.
Dr. Watson, you are past president of the Manitoba Veterinary Association, vice chair of the Winnipeg Humane Society, owner of one of Manitoba's largest and most successful veterinary clinics. You dedicate a substantial amount of your time to pro bono work alongside Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba, for which you are frequently recognized. And you are the recipient of the Global Animal Welfare Award, one of 6 people in the entire world who on an annual basis receive that award. I would challenge anybody here to question your credibility as an animal welfare expert in light of those credentials. Very quickly, Dr. Watson, do you support this bill as an animal welfare expert because you believe that the current practice is contrary to the welfare of horses?
Yes, I support this bill for those reasons. I'm not here representing anyone else but myself as a veterinarian and someone who cares about animal welfare.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. So the Conservative witness, Mr. Wilson, who a moment ago said that 100% of animal welfare experts agree that this bill is wrong, may need to adjust the percentage that he used in the categorization of that. Dr. Watson, can you expand, please, on how the anatomy of horses make them more susceptible to imbalance and stress during air travel compared to other animals?
The draft horses that we're talking about in question here are tall animals with a high center of gravity. They, over a long flight, as long a flight as we're talking about here, they become fatigued during that travel and would be inclined to rest in one of 2 ways. One would be standing on 3-legged tripod, which can be hard to do while balancing or attempting to maintain balance in a moving airplane. And the other would be lying down, which we may not want them to do, but that would be a tired horse's inclination to lie down. Horses prefer to not lie down in an unfamiliar environment with noisy stimulation. You end up with 2 options, neither of which is great, and that leads to horses that don't properly rest on a plane in transport. Consequently, you end up with horses who are exhausted, potentially injured, and potentially lame at the end of that travel.
I know there's been lots of conversation throughout the course of this conversation this morning about facts, and science is based on the premise that facts can be presented and interpreted differently. Clearly, there are different interpretations of facts that have been put before us. I completely reject the premise that a fact only must be interpreted in one way. Clearly, as an animal welfare expert, you have expressed a difference of opinion from some of those we've heard from. Can you share with us, Dr. Watson, in conversations that you've had both with your colleagues in Manitoba, across the country, and internationally, the opinions that they may have on this particular piece of legislation, and if they are in support of the legislation, how it is that they have come to that conclusion based on the scientific veterinary medical expertise that you have provided here this morning, or afternoon, I guess it is now.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of, I have heard some people involved in this process talk about sort of the set of facts, or that there are, some people have said that there seems to be no clear science on some of these issues. The literature is filled with a lot of studies, many publications, including very recent research on horses and horses transported by air and other means. So there's a lot of information that's out there. I have certainly consulted with colleagues of mine from the equine world and also government vets, many of whom are opposed to this practice of transporting animals such long distances in this capacity. Most of them think that there are many shortcomings to the way that we are doing it. If anyone is looking for even just one example of a very robust summary of horse export, the European Food Safety Authority put together a panel on animal health and welfare in 2022, I think, and published a document called Welfare of Equidae During Transport. It references to many, many published studies on horse transport, and the document produces many, many recommendations on how to handle horses in transport by air and other means.
Dr. Watson, I've got about a minute left. We've heard a lot of talk about the mortality rate being low and that being used as the justification or the basis through which we should be analyzing the current practice. Do you think that it is fair or responsible as a veterinary professional and as a world-recognized animal welfare expert that the mortality rate of an animal should be the only consideration we take when talking about the overall health, safety, and well-being of that animal?
If the barometer for animal welfare is how many horses are dead at the end, that is the measure that we look at. That is shameful. I would be embarrassed to cite that publicly because that suggests a total disconnect from an understanding of animal welfare. So yeah, of course, there are many, many other parameters to animal welfare beyond whether a horse or other animal lives or dies. It would be embarrassed to cite low mortality rates as some sort of justification for any kind of conduct related to export or anything else.
Dr. Watson, I want to thank you and recognize as well that you were the Canadian nominee that year for the Canadian Medical Veterinary Association, and through all the countries in the world were chosen as one of the 6 recipients as an animal welfare expert. We thank you very much for your contributions and proud to have you as a Canadian veterinary representative here and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. We are very grateful to you. I'd like to begin with you, sir. When you mentioned that there is a big difference, a huge difference between transportation of animals as you practice and those that are transported for slaughter, you're talking about training. First of all, what do you mean by that? What are the big differences that there are? And wouldn't it be possible to adapt transportation or improve transportation of animals who are being transported for slaughter?
Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to answer in English. Unfortunately, my French is not up to standard. So a lot of the show and companion horses that are being transported, they are handled and they've been trained and halter broke for these purposes. Now, when we have, for example, yearlings, which are horses less than 720 days, their training and their handling is minimal. And in those cases, it's easier to fly them into a group and load them into a group into the air stall so they feel comfortable, they feel safe, and it's also a lot better for them for bringing stress and anxiety down. Yeah? So that's when we ship really, really young horses. The slaughter horses or the horses for fattening, in our opinion, they are a different breed. They are a different kind of animal, and they're also, their minimum training is 0. It's very hard for them to be halter broke because of their posture and their structure, and it would be a lot of maybe it's easier to talk to the people that have the feedlots, but in our opinion, it's very, very hard to start training these horses and to start making them handled and handling them like we do with companion and sport horses. So that's the difference, yes. I hope this answers your question.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Serrien, pour cette...
Thank you very much, Mr. Sirian, for this clarification. Mr. Wilson, following that answer, what we often hear is arguments to prohibit the transportation of horses for slaughter. Involves a lot of the talk about the transportation conditions. Various witnesses have expressed very significant differences about, for example, if you have a companion horse or a competition horse or show horse versus a horse being transported for slaughter. Could you react to this? Are the transportation conditions that different? And perhaps wouldn't that be an avenue for action rather than simply prohibiting all air transportation?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. I will be answering in English.
Currently, the international standards that we abide by are what define transporting horses, whether they're competition horses or whether they're horses that are going for end use to be fattened in Japan. We pride ourselves with exceeding these standards. To argue that stress level is higher or lower of competition horses or of fattening horses, I don't believe there's any metric in which somebody can adequately measure that with a pair of binoculars. The other point that I would like to make is that there's been some claims that these horses are cramped, and one witness testified today that there were 40 of these horses loaded on a trailer. Current transport regulations regulate that we can only transport horses on single-deck trailers. There is no trailer that puts 40 of our export horses on it. They don't make it. So the information has been presented that these horses are bandaged because they're safer, because they have bandages on. Some of the reasons why these horses have bandages on is because they have steel horseshoes on to protect themselves from hitting each other. So currently I don't believe that there's a large difference in it. Can we improve and do better? Yes, we always can, and us as an industry, we as an industry are continually looking to improve. Thank you for your question.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. In your introductory comments, you talked about the pregnant mare urine production. You're the first witness to talk about that. Could you explain to us what this is all about? Is this a side effect of the act of the legislation that hasn't been analyzed?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question.
The PMU industry is a vital industry in Western Canada. It used to be a vital industry in Eastern Canada. In fact, my family had over 400 pregnant mares tied up in the barn. During a mare's gestation, when she is pregnant, she excretes a lot of estrogen in her urine. That urine is then collected, transported through different pharmaceutical companies, and it goes into make hormone replacement therapy for women suffering the debilitating side effects of menopause. It also goes as an estrogen source for birth control pills, and it is used in a lot of other pharmaceutical products. The end result, the mare has to be pregnant in order to collect this hormone. Canada has some of the best standards of animal care within the PMU industry. We pride ourselves on that. We have other companies looking to come to Canada to secure sources of pregnant mare's urine to refine this hormone. And if we lose this market for these foals, the reality is that these foals are still going to be bred. They are still going to be raised on these farms for this industry. These growers are under contract. So that is why I think that this bill, us and our members, market several of these horses annually. Bill, would you have anything you'd like to add?
Unfortunately, we're at time, but if there's any, Bill, just a very quick comment if you have any.
Yes, I would. I would like to talk about the breeders' situation now when this bill is in place. We have the 2023 born foals are still at the breeders. The contracts with the Japanese state that they will be shipped between April of 2025 and March of 26. These mares are going to foal again in April, May, and June of this year, And the contracts for them to go to Japan are from April 2026 to March 2027. And there has been no talk about transition period for these breeders. Their livelihood, their farms are dependent on this industry. And currently, there is no other market for these foals, mares, or studs.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. And I apologize, we're at time, and I have to be able to move on to Mr. McGregor. But certainly there has been talk, not in the bill, but in conversation about what compensation could look like. But I'll go to Mr. McGregor. He might have questions on that. Over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not particularly on that, but I do have a question for Mr. Wilson. So, I know that Japan is our primary market for live horse exports. Are there any other countries which accept them as well? Just briefly.
Bill would be
There has been one shipment to Korea as well.
Just one, okay.
Just one
But Japan absolutely is 99%.
Yes, that's
and it's my understanding that they prefer the live horses because they are served as a delicacy, which is served raw. It's a fairly high-end dish. Am I correct in that?
It is a high-end dish,
Yeah.
as is Wagyu steak,
Yeah.
other high-end products.
But they prefer the live horses
live.
because the freshness
The
is a big
fresh
factor.
meat is the
Yeah.
major factor.
And Canada does have processing capacity for horses, right? I think we have roughly 2 plants. Am I correct?
There are 2 currently that are federally licensed.
Mm-hmm.
The one in Alberta, excuse me, is I've talked to ownership there that's in the process of being sold.
Okay.
So it will not be eliminated. We have spent ever since, excuse me again, ever since the Bill C-355 has been discussed, we have tried to contact many, many smaller plants throughout Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan to discuss with them the possibility to process these horses for overseas export, and 100% of the time we have been turned down.
Okay. And yeah, I just wanted
there is no.
I have a question on very, very much related to that. So, but do we export horse meat, like horse carcasses as well? Like what's roughly in comparison to live horses versus horse meat? Do you have a breakdown on the percentages, very roughly?
Yeah, nowhere near as much through the carcass. I would suggest, I don't have those figures in front of me, but I would suggest possibly somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 horses would be processed to go via meat.
Okay. So that market does exist
Very,
beyond.
very limited.
Okay,
yes.
beyond Canada's borders. Okay, thank you for that. I do want to, in my limited time, turn to overseas horse services. And I want to go through the points that you made, Mr. Sarian, on the bill's contents. So I heard 3 specific concerns during your opening statement. You made reference to the fact that pilots don't have any experience with horses, and I agree. Their main expertise is to fly the plane, and so I think you had concern with the fact that pilots have to have the declaration delivered to them. You mentioned also that the CBSA and airport facilities don't really have the facilities to detain horses appropriately with the standard level of care that they deserve. And I think just concerns over the documentation. So if we as a committee were to address those specific concerns that you have in the bill with amendments, would that then make the bill more palatable to you and your organization in terms of support? I just want to know your overall comfort level if we are to address those specific concerns.
Yes, it would be. So with the pilots and CBSA, I think they're just the wrong people to do the declaration to. I think it needs to be under CFIA. Number two is if there is proper facilities at these airports to detain horses, and I'm just talking about companion horses and sport horses, it could be a charter, it could be 30 polo ponies, for example, or it could be 30 show jumpers. Then if they have those facilities to detain them and to feed them, water them, then yes, that would be that is part of the what we would like to see. The problem is that a lot of these airports don't have the finances or the land to build these facilities. The only two in Canada that have facilities are Calgary Airport and Toronto Airport, but Montreal, Ottawa, Halifax, none of these airports have these facilities. So that's our problem with the detention. And the other problem is that we cease traceability. There is no traceability whatsoever. We only depend on the information from the owner of the horse.
Thank you, and I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I just have 30 seconds left, and I just wanted to go a quick question to Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson, I've been on the tarmac of an airport when I've had to exit the building and get onto an aircraft. We're all very familiar with the high noise levels at airports and inside an aircraft when it's accelerating down the runway. Can you just talk a little bit about what those noise levels are like for an animal like a horse?
Well, they're loud. Other planes are landing and taking off while these horses are being unloaded from the truck and then waiting to be flown. Horses have a keen sense of hearing, like many species of animals, and so they would be disturbing the same way they're disturbing to us, but especially disturbing to horses who have never been exposed to any of these sounds. That's what is so stressful about transport for horses, exposure to stimuli that they've not encountered before, and that's what is important. The other witnesses commented about habituation and sort of conditioning to the various stimuli that they're going to encounter during transport. These feedlot animals are not accustomed to any of that, and that's what makes it particularly stressful, especially when compared to other groups that have had that kind of
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I apologize. I gave an extra 30 seconds, but colleagues, try to not ask questions in the last 30 seconds because there's generally not time for an adequate response. I'm usually pretty flexible, but we're at time. How we're going to do this, 4 minutes to the Conservatives, 4 minutes to the Liberals, 2 minutes and 2 minutes, I hope, to my NDP and Bloc colleagues so we can be fair and get ourselves out of here shortly after. Mr. Leslie for 4 minutes.
I'm sorry to hear that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada officials, as well as I assume many other folks you have tried to meet with on this issue, have been non-responsive to the invitation for a tour. Not everybody in government's like that, though, because Pat in my riding, who breeds horses for this exact purpose, reached out to me when he heard of this legislation and said, "Can you come for a tour?" And so I did. I went and saw the care that he takes for his animals, and it was very clear to him that this Liberal legislation, with the help of the radical animal rights activist groups, are trying to put him and 300 other plus families in this industry out of business with absolutely no regard for their financial future and the future of their entire sector. And yes, you mentioned celebrities. They have effectively used, albeit D-list celebrities, to try to gain support for issues with the ulterior agenda of actually giving animal rights, not worrying about animal welfare. But in those conversations with AFC that you have had or with other MPs, has there been a lot of interest in understanding what the financial consequences of the members that you represent would be? And do you have any kind of statistic on what the anticipated cost would be for your members?
At this point, no, there has not been any interest in understanding the economics of the devaluation of this commodity, of these animals, of these people's livestock, of their ability to feed their families. And we find that as an industry extremely concerning. We want to be upfront and realize that we do care for our animals. We pride ourselves in upholding standards and surpassing standards. And we want to be active in addressing this legislation, that it needs to be more comprehensive. A lot of these families have put their entire life into breeding a specific bloodline of these horses. To lose that when we're exceeding the standards to us is extremely disheartening. Mr. Shore, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yes, again, as I have explained already, the value of these foals, mares, and studs have been devalued or will be devalued to under 10% of their present worth when this ban is in effect. There will be approximately 13,000 horses, foals, mares, and studs that have no other market. What is going to happen to these horses?
Thank you. And I guess just before I close in the last 40 seconds here, Mr. Wilson, is there any evidence, you mentioned the care that your members or that producers provide and obviously care deeply about these animals. Is there any evidence that there has been maltreatment or mistreatment by any producers for animals destined for export, as well as any evidence that CFIA has not done an adequate job in inspecting the transportation of these animals?
Absolutely not. We uphold our standards. We surpass our standards. We have had audits from the SPCA at my feedlot. We have had the report that is published on the Freedom of Information Act, and the notes of the officers are that we need to bring more people to these facilities to see how these animals are handled. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Drouin, no more than 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Watson, I just want to ask you a few questions. Do you practice with live, or I should say, do you do animal agriculture at all, or?
I practice with a multitude of different animal species. I'm primarily a companion animal veterinarian, but the exercise of veterinary medicine is one of extrapolation from species to species in terms of drug use and other things. So when called upon, though it's not frequently, I do care for horses.
So large animals is not part of your day-to-day operation?
Cows are not part of my day-to-day operation, and small ruminants are not part of my day-to-day operation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilson, thank you for being before committee, and I certainly I'll be upfront with everyone. Mr. Wilson is my constituent. I want to thank your family for contributing to our local economy. I certainly I've known the Wilson family for a long time, and I appreciate the contributions that you have made to not only to Vankleek Hill but to the entire region in our community. The bill, as is, calls for an 18-month coming into force, and I just want to, we will be coming to amendments in the next few weeks for the bill, and I'm not going to chastise anyone in this place for supporting or not supporting this particular bill. Everyone has a right to stand up for what they truly believe, but should this bill move forward, and should it be adopted by Parliament, the coming into force and the impact on the farm when you, from raising colts or from raising, from the time a colt will come on your farm to leaving your farm, what is that time frame?
Thank you for the question. Despite, I forget the gentleman's name, I did vote Liberal, and I have supported Liberal Party over the last several years, so I just want that on the record. No. No. So this again brings up our point of the lack of consultation that we want to be transparent about. As a dairy farmer would argue when they're trying to buy quota, and I hear this through my business, is, Kevin, we can't shut the tap off. So the lack of understanding is paramount. These mares are in foal that are going to foal in 2024. And the reality is they're going to be bred in 2024 to foal again in 2025. You can't shut that off. So from the time that they come to they don't come to my facility until they're between 6 to 12 months of age. We take the utmost care of these horses. And some of these horses we take from some people, they're not in the best of shape. They haven't been wormed, they haven't been cared for, and they haven't had their feet trimmed. We provide that for them. It takes us almost 24 months to put these horses into market condition. And then we transport them across Canada. And I have some of the best people working for me that do this on a monthly basis. I have invested over $150,000 in each trailer I use and invested in layover spots on the route where these horses are fed electrolytes, they're rested, they're ready to go and perform on the next stage. This is not something that we simply cram them into a box and shut the doors and close our nose and close our eyes. This doesn't work that way. We care for these animals from the day they arrive to the day they leave. So in total, I believe if there were an amendment, we need between 36 and 48 months of time post Governor General authority coming into force. That gives us an opportunity to just address the foals. Currently, we do not have domestic slaughter capacity to transform these horses. We do not. There's one family in Quebec that has a license, and currently, the last I checked with them, they were only processing horses once every 4 weeks. Where are we going to go with these horses? To the south, to the north? We have tried to look in other avenues to get domestic capacity, and every single slaughterhouse and processing plant that we have got to have stood and looked at us and said, Kevin, why would we invest that kind of money so we can have activists at the gate when we're trying to provide a service to our fellow business people? We do not want to bring that on our families and in our community. That's why they will not invest in a slaughterhouse. Multiple people have said, Kevin, if you buy it and build it, we will run it for you, but we don't want to have a cent invested into it. So in the economic impact of our region, we pay $1.8 million in salaries at my business. If this goes away, I will have to lay off 5 of my full-time staff. Thank you for your question.
Okay. And can you talk to me? I don't know how much time I have. Okay, thank you.
Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes environ.
Mr. Parent, you have 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Watson, if I've understood your words correctly, you're not necessarily against slaughtering horses. Your position is that you're denouncing the transportation conditions. If the transportation conditions were to be improved or adjusted, what would your reaction be?
I'm not sure that the transportation conditions could be satisfactorily improved, that it would continue to be a financially viable business for the people that partake of it.
Parce que pour Monsieur Serien,
because Mr. Serien was explaining that some transportation was perhaps more comfortable. So, in other words, it exists, but you're thinking that it wouldn't be profitable. Is that correct?
That would be my that would be my comment, that it would probably not be profitable. The conditions that some of these $250,000 to $500,000 horses travel in are obviously dramatically different than the conditions in which feedlot horses travel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Watson. Monsieur Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. Mr. Wilson, Mr. Shore, I've already asked the question, but very briefly, do you think that there's anything we could do between the two to improve the transportation conditions?
Currently, we believe that as industry, we can do a better job of educating fellow constituents, fellow industry of how we do it. There is no difference in the standard for flying a $500,000 horse or a $10,000 horse. A horse does never know what you paid for him, despite what a lot of people claim. So can we do something better? We believe that we are providing the best way to transport these houses that have been raised in the setting they're raised. Thank you.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Parent. Monsieur Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parent. Mr. Wilson, Mr. McGregor.
Take its final slot. I would like to thank the witnesses, Dr. Watson, Mr. Serien, and Mr. Shore and Mr. Wilson for being here today, and I appreciate it. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, and I'm looking, Monsieur Parent, do you have one quick thing to say? Because I know people do got to get to question period very quickly.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for this time. I consulted colleagues before today's session. You will, I think, see that there could be a unanimous consent to adopt a motion in addition to the code regarding grocery pricing. Well, I'll just read this to you. That's the best way to proceed. whereas there's an absence of response from Loblaws and Walmart to our last considerations, and given that the negotiation of the Code of Conduct seemed to be seriously compromised, it is agreed that the committee call the members of the Board of Directors, the interim Board of Directors of the Code of Conduct, as well as those who were directors in charge of dealing with this code, to testify about this situation, to inform us as to the situation, and to better orient potential recommendations of the committee to the government. That's the end of the motion. Chair, the purpose of this is because this is happening right now, and we're all aware of the fact that this is dropping, and the legislation has a time factor, and this will be a last step to have true information, because I believe that there's information that the committee does not have, which could, in fact, assist us. Thank you.
Okay, so the way this works is we do need unanimous consent if we want to debate it, but I know, Mr. Barlow, you want to at least make a comment. I do want to be mindful of time, and I think we can all agree this is important, and we could do a subcommittee in the 2 weeks interim if we have to, but go ahead, Mr. Barlow, quickly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I think you'll have support from us on Mr. Perron's proposal, but I also want to move a motion very quickly. Colleagues, given that A, 7 provincial premiers and 70% of Canadians oppose this government's 23% carbon tax hike on April Fool's Day, B, the premiers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick have issued public letters calling on the government to provide a carbon tax carve-out for farmers and pass Bill C-234 in its original form, and C, that the carbon tax currently costs greenhouse operators in Canada $22 million a year, and they will pay between $82 and $100 million by 2030 when the carbon tax quadruples. D, 44% of fresh fruit and vegetable growers are already selling at a loss, and 77% can't offset production cost increases. E, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has stated the carbon tax will cost farmers nearly $1 billion by 2030. F, the 2023 Food Price Report estimates that the carbon tax will cost a typical 5,000-acre farm $150,000 by 2030. And lastly, the food professor recommends pausing the carbon tax for the entire food supply chain. And the committee calls on the government to restore affordability and spike the carbon tax before April 1st. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm seeing from Mr. Patron there was issues with translation,
no.
And we are at time. Very quickly, Monsieur Patron. Obviously, I wanted to be fair, but
very briefly, and with all due respect for Mr. Barlow, I thank you for your support for the motion. We were not receiving interpretation because the motion was being read so quickly, and the interpreters did not have it in advance, so we could study this upon our return. We will listen to it, and we'll be back when we come back. But in the limited time that we do have, I would appreciate if each of the political parties could confirm their agreement with the unanimous consent motion.
So, look, we're at time, and I've opened the door as the chair, and this isn't committee business. Mr. Barlow has said that they would support it. We still have to schedule it. So here's what I'll do, because people do have to get off to question period. Short of anyone wanting to jump in right now, there might be some different elements. We can deal with this if we would like to call a subcommittee. We could always do something virtually over the break and get our schedule in order. You know that we have a number of scheduling items that we've already discussed last meeting in terms of how we want to move. But short of having Mr. McGregor or anyone else jump in and absolutely move this, what I would suggest, Monsieur Parent, is that this is important, but let us deal with this in a format over the next 2 weeks so that we can be in a position when we come back in April. We're not going to necessarily get this decided today, I don't think. I'm not seeing that around the table, including Mr. Barlow. I know you've moved that as well. That can be something we discuss in terms of when we come back in April. Or if you do, I take notice that if you do want to call meetings, because this is our last scheduled day before we break, that would be something that there's procedurally would be a requirement to get a 104, I forget exactly, yeah. So if you do have that in hand, we can discuss that, but I don't think that's the case necessarily right now. Mr. Parent, but then I do want to move because we're vastly over time and we have to watch our resources that we even have here.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, with all due respect, I consulted everybody before we began. I already know that everybody agrees with this motion. To explain that we're not going to adopt it today takes more time than giving everybody the time for them to say yes, because the message that we'd be giving today is very important. Thank you. So I would like just people to be able to say yes or no from every party.
What we'll do is there actually has to be unanimous consent. I have members that have had to leave. There's other commitments. So, Eve, I'm very happy to work with this. We're very accessible throughout the break. So let's talk about this because I'm not seeing a consent. And Mr. Barlow, I'm not seeing an ability to move forward. But if you do want to move on procedurally what you're entitled to, we can do that. We're vastly over time. We're 15 minutes over time.
I realize that. No. I realize that, Mr. Chair. I just would call my motion to a vote. The date is April 1st, so the tax goes up. We're not going to be back until after that. I would just ask the committee vote on my motion right now before we leave. I know it'll be quick.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair, we're over time, and there will be a vote tonight. I mean, you guys are presenting motions left and right, so I would say that both motions are technically out of order because we're over time. So.
This one's right up the middle, not
this,
left and right.
No, Mr. Barlow, I try to be flexible. I try to be flexible with Mr. Parent. I certainly let you read in. Mr. Drouin is right. So let's not abuse the process here. So we're happy to be able to discuss this over the break, and we have plenty of opportunity. I'll adjourn the meeting and let people get to question period. Thank you.